Okay, and we are live with our 33rd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to Absolute AppSec. I'm going to sing us some intro music. No, never mind. I don't sing that well. Yeah, we still haven't done that. I was just thinking about it. We've been spending all of our time going to conferences and speaking and, other things along those lines. Both Ken and I were out at Cactus Khan this weekend. So if it looks like we're a little behind the times, I guess that would be why. At least that's what I'm blaming my haggard look on. I don't know about Ken.
Yeah, I'm pretty but hey, got some caffeine. We'll be good. And we're joined by, and I know we're joined by John Melton, who I'll introduce in a second here. So that's gonna make it lively. That's gonna make it fun. Yeah, I don't think we should ever do. I don't know if we should ever even do intro music because it's like too kind of, I don't know. It's like kitschy. It's like just, we don't need it.
I'll just make sure it's like the 80s electronic, like keyboard. So, harken back to the days of, I can't remember those crappy 80s fantasy movies, right? That would be
Stranger Things style intro, if anything.
Okay. Well, now we're going into video intros. Gosh.
No, just the song. The it's just what you said, the electronic kind of sound to it.
Okay. All right. So now you want one. That's what you're saying. Got it.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna do it, that would be what I would go for sure. I don't know. Now I'm leaning towards it because do any of your kids play music that they could make it?
Yeah. Actually, my daughter's a musician. I'll see what I can sort out. It might be bad, but it might be good. You never know.
You should ask her, and we'll see how it turns out. And actually, even if it's not great, that would be at least original to us. So
that's true.
I'm sure it'd be great. It's your daughter. I'm sure it'd be great. Objectively,
it'll be a nice boost to her confidence. Wow. So we've gone like 3 minutes and haven't talked any security stuff yet. So
right. Yeah, we should probably. Well, and actually, before we do that, why don't we share our experience from Cactus Khan? I mean, what were your favorite parts, Seth? Besides my talk.
Oh, your talk was awesome. Weird Al coming along, right? You and Chris Gates. I don't know. Security conferences are interesting to me from a general kind of hallway con perspective. Those of you that know me know that I used to work for a company that's based in Phoenix, so I get down there and I end up spending more time. I am even repping my Cactus Khan shirt, right? But I spend more time meeting with people and seeing people catching up with people than I do necessarily in talks. But there was a lot of good training content. There was, they're your typical lockpick village. They had you build the badge, which was cool, and then update the badge. That's always kind of fun at a security conference. It's more of a maker thing than it necessarily is specific to security, but they're all pretty interesting. I don't know. Definitely the highlights for me were, hallway, seeing people and seeing that community that's grown, right? I think there was about 800 attendees this year. The first time I went, it was probably 200 to 300. So it's grown quite a bit. What about you, Ken?
Well, Justin was asking how your workshop went. How do you feel that it went?
It went pretty well. I mean, we had traditional, kind of workshop issues with Wi-Fi, and then some sort of an IDS that was sitting between attendees and our vulnerable web app. But there was a lot of good activity. I mean, we had a couple of younger kids in the audience that were there with their parents, and they were totally, logging in, running SQL map against stuff and learning how to do, hands-on web hacking. And so it was fun, right? I enjoy that aspect, and I enjoy interacting with people. So it was good.
You enjoy that, interacting with people?
I do.
Interacting with people? I don't know if I feel the same way. No, yeah. Well, like-minded people.
Yes, yes, there you go. I guess that's what I should say, right? When it's a topic that I'm passionate about, then definitely yes. Right.
I've been to Walmart at 3 a.m. I don't want to talk to everybody.
Oh, I see. I see. So what did you like about Cactus Khan?
As you know, I've never soldered before in that blinking light. With the help of Chris Gates and a couple people at the table there, I was able to solder my first badge together. I've always wanted to do this. So for me, that was like a big thing because I want to start soldering with my son and like building kits and stuff. And so that was cool, man. That was really awesome that they did that. Because they had if you're not there, probably not there. They had these folks that are just hanging out at the tables, helping you out, giving you walkthrough of the schematics, how to solder, showing you, like they had like 5 or 4 irons per table. It was just really awesome for them to have put that effort in it, to have done that. That was my favorite part because I always wanted to do it and I never had. So that was really cool. Our talk, I liked my talk, but again, objectively, but yeah, the crowd was good. It was a good time. So, and then we learned that Justin Larson, aka Chicken Fingies,
Yay!
Chicken Fingies. Yeah, he's a big fan of the chicken fingers. So I guess he was out to dinner with Seth and another guy, Chris, and asked for, instead of chicken tenders, chicken fingers. So that was a whole thing the whole weekend. So now his nickname is Chicken Fingies. But yeah, that was Justin, who was on a few episodes ago. I guess we should get into some security stuff, right? So at some point, right? And then introduce John so we can actually talk to him and pick his brain. So for our AppSec minute, hopefully I don't drop out here with lag. Seth, you and I were talking. You were describing behavior in an application that you thought was really weird, and I said I only once, like never before that one time, never after that one time, came across the same behavior, but I had access to source code and I can say why that was happening. So can you explain the behavior before? This is the learning moment, by the way, before we get into
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, so this goes back to, using Burp Suite and watching, traffic as it goes back and forth with the application, not just interacting with the application as it looks in the browser itself. So this was a few years ago. I was just doing a normal assessment against an application, logging in, accessing, different content. I had multiple different accounts, including like an administration account, right? And so all the administration endpoints I had mapped out, hey, this is where they exist. And I went back to do my authorization testing to see who could, if I could get to those administrative web pages without having logged into the application or being logged in as a different user. And the behavior that I was seeing was exactly what you would expect. I tried to hit like /admin/dashboard, and all I got was a redirect. The web browser itself would redirect me to the normal login page because I wasn't an administrator, which was all fine and good. And then I started to look at my Burp Suite history, and I noticed that my location redirects that were coming back from the administrative pages were massive, right? It wasn't just your normal, few hundred, kilobytes. Not kilobytes, even just like tens of kilobytes, right? Because normally you just get a 302 redirect. It's the headers and the location response and maybe a little bit of HTML in there for a JavaScript redirect, and that's it. But I was seeing massive amounts of data come back from each of the requests to the administration section. And when I actually opened it up, I could render those pages, and it was displaying me full administration details such as the dashboard and other things like that without actually logging into the application. So the application was redirecting me, and that was the instruction in the code, but I was still actually able to execute administrative functions as an unauthenticated user because of how the application was handling that redirect behind the scenes. This was the only time that I've ever seen any activity like that, which is the reason that I brought it up. Ken and I were talking about building the course, but that was the whole reason that we brought it up. And that was the interesting thing, that Ken actually had the source. So Ken, what's going on behind the scenes? I mean, this was like an ASP.NET application.
Yeah, and I'm trying to put the actual code because it's real simple. I don't know. I'm just say login ISPX. I want to say we came to the determination it was false, but okay. So I believe it was false. It was the because it defaults to true if I'm not mistaken. So I put it in the chat, and I'll put it in Slack too. But basically, there's a little known in fact in the sense that I didn't know about it. So if you yeah, exactly right. Little known. So response.redirect, typically in a .NET app, you'll see this all over the place for redirection. And what you typically see though is like maybe you'll see the name of the page. So this example is response.redirect, quotes login.aspx. And so that means you're going to redirect it to that page. What you typically, it's pretty sure it defaults to true. So when it's set to false, what ends up happening is instead of the kind of the flow short circuiting there, like literally it would just stop executing any code and perform the redirect and send the response back. When you give it a false parameter, it'll continue executing the code. So although you're being redirected, the view page is still being, like the rest of that code that renders the view is still executing. So that's why you see it back in the body portion of the 302 redirect. And as Seth said, at that point, you can just change the values of 302 in the location header. You can just change that via like some substitution rules with burp to be 200 and strip that header. So you just interact with the app as normal. So if you ever see that, you should definitely, I guess what I'm saying is you should definitely look for response.redirect. And if you see a second parameter false, look at that endpoint, because it's probably got some unintended security consequences to that directive. So yeah, that was just the kind of, it's weird because Seth and I have both only experienced it once. So that's why we kind of knew exactly what each other were talking about. So
yeah.
It's rare.
I mean, and then this always goes back to, like from a code review perspective, we're looking at source code and you see a, response redirect like Ken is talking about. If you see flags in there that you don't understand, calling back to the documentation is always a good thing, right? Even if it, takes a little bit more time, if there are security implications, you want to understand what that is. It's not always easy to get through all of that or to understand it all, but at the very least, there's just a lot that goes into it, right? But you do want to understand everything that's going into those different security, the security affecting endpoints, right, or functions, and how it's interacting with the application. So anyway, so that's the AppSec minute for today. If anyone out there has seen this behavior before, we'd love to hear about it. Again, it was something both Ken and I have experienced, but only once over the course of 10, 15 years. So if anybody else has seen it or has seen it in the wild, it'd be interesting to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, I have just pasted in John's website and Twitter handle into both chats. So without further ado, because we really do appreciate John's time and him joining us, John Melton, I mean, the funny thing is, from like two or three different, actually probably like three different people that I know who I respect, they all called John like one of the smartest dudes that they've ever met. So yeah, I know you're laughing, but that was genuinely the the thing I kept hearing about John. And I finally got to meet John at Loco Mocosec, where he was speaking. And I'll put in the talk here that he was giving, but it was about building an AppSec program, which I'm sure we'll get into. John runs I think you run it, right? The App Sensor project.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So John runs the App Sensor project for OWASP. And he's given, he's smart guy. He's given talks at AppSec USA, AppSec EU. Again, I mentioned Loco Mocosec. So there's a lot more. We're going to get into it. But without further ado, John, please say hi to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Nice to see y'all.
And
That's
John's
it.
based out
That's
of-
all you've got, John. Come on, man.
I don't sing. I don't dance. How's everybody doing? Thanks for having me. Hopefully it will be interesting.
But you do appear to play guitars.
I do not resemble the comment about smartest guy. That's very kind, and I appreciate it. But I'm not sure who you've been talking to, who your sources are. Yeah, the guitars. So I am what you would call musically challenged. And so some things, in life come easy, and those are great. But music is not one of those for me. But I am so enamored by people who are good at guitar. I own several of them, but I don't play them well. But I keep trying. And me and my kids sing out of tune to them, and it's a good time. So yeah.
Awesome. You got to keep trying, right, to get good at something. So
That's right.
Yeah, but they look nice. They look like nice guitars. I don't know much about guitars. But they look nice.
They sound good when other people play them. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, one thing we always like to ask people, basically we always like to get into, and actually I should probably mention, so I know so John's worked at US Bank. He's played blue team with at US Bank, Wells Fargo, worked for the DoD for a bit. And Whitehat Security. Did you guys correct me if I'm wrong, did you get acquired by Whitehat at some point? Like it was you and two other people?
Most of the information's correct, but it wasn't me. Yeah, there were three guys that got acquired by Whitehat, and they had a static. They were, Whitehat's predominantly known for dynamic analysis. Years ago, they bought a company that did static analysis. It was a static analysis startup. And so they bought that intellectual property, brought it in-house. It was an acqui-hire. I got hired by Whitehat like a month later.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to come work on their static analysis product and build it out. So yeah, I wasn't part of the startup that got acquired, but I came over like a month later.
Okay. So, yeah. The information was inaccurate, but yeah, ultimately, what were you doing there? You were setting up like static analysis rules, or?
No. So yes and no. So I had two jobs. I ran the R&D team that did all of the security and research, and like you say, building static analysis rules and all that kind of stuff. But it was a little different because it was from the perspective of the vendor. But it was a unique situation. So most of the vendors at the time were, that you're familiar with. They were sell a big product, drop it in, in-house, and start scanning your apps. Well, the issue was the vendor had no visibility into what was happening. So they had to cover everything in the world. And Whitehat was a good bit behind at the time because they hadn't been in the market. So the one benefit we did have was our deployment model, which was we deployed into your environment as a VM that was able to connect back. So closer to kind of the Veracode model where you do the upload, but we had a VM that was running in your environment. And so the key benefit from our research perspective was we could actually see the data in the scans that our customers were running. And so we were able to catch up super quick from a rules perspective because we could actually see what our customers needed and what languages they needed, what frameworks, libraries, all that kind of thing. But also because we could write rule generation frameworks, right? We didn't have to just do a rule at a time. We were able to tweak our static analyzer to analyze libraries and frameworks themselves instead of applications, and then generate rules for those libraries and frameworks and kind of build on top of each other. So that was kind of half of my job there. And the other half was actually writing the static analysis engine. So I owned the Java scanning engine at the time. Since I've left, it's been reworked, I think, and now it's kind of one of these Omni engines. But yeah, I got way into static analysis for a while. Learned way more about it than I cared to know. Had to go back and read the Dragon book and compilers and all that jazz. I got pretty decent at all that stuff for a little bit. But yeah, and the
Dragon book.
So the classic book for compilers is got a picture of this like mythical dragon on the front of it, and so that's called the Dragon book. Yeah, but the reason that I went to Whitehat, actually, I had a good job, a good gig, and I was happy there, had good people, but I felt constrained by the tool set. and I took a chance at kind of going to build, having the ability to write my own static analyzer was just too much to ignore. So I went over there, and it was a good time. We were able to do some impressive things, some things I'm pretty proud of. But yeah, so I was there for about 5 years.
That's cool. I mean,
Well,
the static analysis stuff is always, I mean, it's super interesting to me on the low level code perspective. Like I did it, I mean, my degree was computer science. So, we did all the compiler classes and
right,
everything like that, and building ASTs. And I always feel like, oh man, it'd be so much fun to get into it. And then the second I'm like, oh, well, I'll build one for Django or, some Python framework, whatever. It's always like, oh yeah, there's so much work that goes into understanding that I'm like, I can't, I can't just do this in 2 hours, a night here and there. Right.
Exactly.
It takes a dedicated staff. And
I had this really long conversation with Dennis Cruz when we were, I think it was in New York, and to the point of screaming at each other. It was the first time I ever met the guy, and we talked for like 6 hours one night. And I love Dennis. He's super passionate, and that's something that I heavily value. But we were screaming at each other because he had come from Ounce Labs.
Yep.
And he had left.
And he did the whole O2 stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And he left Ounce, and he said, the one thing that we're missing that's good is, one thing we're missing in security is a really good open source static analyzer. And I'm like, yeah, you're still going to be missing that, because who's going to write that, and you look at the work that Justin Collins has done on Brakeman, it's just, I mean, that is a labor of love, like that. That was a phenomenal amount of effort that, I mean, he is unbelievably well trained in that area, and still, you look at the amount of time that he had to put into it, and he just, again, I love Justin, but he just punted on a lot of stuff because he's like, I can't, it's an open source side project. I don't have time I know how to build this stuff, but I don't have the hours to build it, and so, yeah. But when you have access to a static analyzer that you can tweak, that is a killer situation to be in from the security perspective. One of the things I was super proud of that we were able to do at Whitehat was, we realized when you do this, you have to give guidance and directives on how do you fix this thing. And our guidance and directives to make it halfway decent was, okay, you've got, whatever the issue is, right? You have to make it specific to the language and the framework, or it's kind of useless. You can't just say, don't allow, user input to land in output, right? Like that can be your solution for cross-site scripting. You have to give people directed, good guidance. So we put a lot of effort in that. And then we kind of realized, well, we have all this metadata when we're in the AST that we know, because we're going to spit out that data, and we're giving you directed guidance. Why can't we just fix it, right? So for a good number of data flow issues, we were able to actually, and because of our deployment model where we were deployed in a VM in the customer environment, we could, and we had hooks into their version control system. That's the way the model was. We could do the whole, what was it? SADB. Remember SADB from Twitter?
Yeah, that was Justin and Neil's project. Yeah, Justin Collins again.
And Alex, right? Yeah, and
Alex Stamos, who was also on the podcast.
Alex Smolin. Those three.
Or Smolin, sorry.
Yeah.
We haven't had Alex Stamos on it, man.
Right. Not yet, right?
He's been on the mind because of the Facebook stuff, so I think that's why. Yeah.
He might have a little more time now. But yeah. So those three, I remember I was in the crowd for that, and I remember the hush that went over the room, followed by, that was the first time I'd ever seen a standing ovation at a security con. Like the crowd erupted when they saw that. And, I think those three are still kind of dumbfounded at the response, but I mean, that's what people wanted, right? Like that workflow of being able to notify people. So we were able to do that. Like we were able to give actual patches on data flow issues. Because when you think about it, when you have access to that, it's not really that hard. You're already doing 90% of the work. We have a couple patents out of it where we went back, and I mean, there's some work to do, don't get me wrong. But commercial companies have the time and money to do that work, right? And so I think we should expect them to do those kind of things. So that was fun.
So how did SAD be? It was a dashboard, right, for like collection of. I mean, I've seen the talk, but it's been a while since I think it's been like 5 years since they gave it that I remember. So
yeah, pay dirt in that talk was you pushed a commit and SADB would email you broke the commit and here's where, right? Like that was what everybody went crazy about because, and where I'm at now, like we don't necessarily cite issues in 30 minutes or an hour or even a month, right? Like when you're triaging and vetting these issues, you may have an extended period of time. If you've got hundreds or thousands of applications, the automated getting it back to somebody super quick. And, there's lots of ways to do that. In CI or, even in the IDE, there's a lot of tools now. But getting it back to the person when when it's fresh in their brain is obviously the way to go. And that was the first time I think anybody had connected all those dots. And it was just, it was a killer demo.
Yeah. It's funny how unassuming they are about some of the work they do too. Like they're like, oh yeah. And actually it's funny that you mentioned that, you're right. Justin punted on a lot of things with Brakeman, but in the end, what's funny is that it's such a better tool than everything else. I mean, part of that's obviously because the Rails is very opinionated.
Yep.
Seth and I have talked about this where the framework's just so opinionated that like you can be pretty, but not to diminish at all, like the fact that he's built something that's much better than expensive tools. But one question I have is how were companies not like, so they were okay with code, you having access to their, because typically, like companies can be pretty uptight about that, about having access to their, obviously they're paying you to do static analysis,
Yeah.
But you're in their environment, you know what I mean? Like it's different because you've got an exception.
Yep. So there was kind of, I am not a salesman and you should never put me in front of people. I am certainly on the engineering side where I will tell you the truth, even if it kills the sale. But I was always dumbfounded by, I'm still caught off guard by some of the things that security people will go, yeah, let's bring that in-house. Whitehat went to, they did a lot of effort in trying to make sure that a lot of security boxes were checked. So these were hardened VMs and they were sandboxed from the rest of the environment, and the credentials we always made sure were read-only credentials, and they were kind of VCS specific, and each user account, we did a lot of things to try to make it as minimal as possible. And it was a little bit different from like Veracode, where Veracode, you were shipping all of your binary or all of your source code up to the cloud, right? So for ours, it was similar, but you weren't shipping all of your stuff. It was just the vulnerable bits, which I always thought like people were much more comfortable with that than shipping all of it in sales pitches. And I'm like, I don't know that makes sense. Like you've literally just given the directions, like you've thrown away all the fluff and said, this is the only, but some people said no, for sure. Some people said, we'll never buy anything that looks like that. And then time has proven them wrong, right? Over time, they've gone, well, the product is better. We're able to find and fix things better. You're able to give us more information. And I'm not just talking about Whitehat. There's other vendors that follow the cloud model. And when it first came out, they said, absolutely not. We will not ship our code, up at all. And now they do it constantly. Right?
I mean, it's a good point to make that like I don't know how this is sort of connected, but because we've seen that shift where we're more comfortable exposing ourselves to a bit more risk for the the benefits. We see the benefits there, and from a business standpoint, it's just like Seth and I were talking about, how like we've at dinner at Cactus Khan, how we've all gotten comfortable with like putting, Alexa Nest cams in our houses and all these listening and viewing devices. We're all accepting the. Well, yeah, we have. I guess not you, not everybody, but we become. I mean, on the whole, we'll say we as like
that's right.
US, we become more comfortable with exposing ourselves to risk because it's convenient, and the risk of us being the risk the benefit can outweigh the risk. Like if you're on vacation and you've got cameras inside your house,
for sure.
it's helpful. So, anyways, yeah. So this was.
Yeah, we always wonder that question about actually pushing data. I think back to my time in the working at a bank, and that was always these are the keys to the kingdom, so it can never go anywhere that's uncontrolled.
Right.
And then I would look at the systems, they're storing it on some old, Windows 2000 file server that's got every, I'm
Absolutely.
like, you realize that anybody that's on our network already has access to this code, and there's so many exfiltration points that, if I go to somebody I trust, I mean, there's definitely a lot of education that goes into that when you're talking to salespeople, when the salespeople are talking to different companies.
Yep, I remember. I remember we had at a bank one time, and this was not the bank that I worked for, but it was somewhere where we were doing some help. They were worried about the same issue, and then we found out that they were doing backups to disk or tape, and then they were literally, because the network that they were on, the WAN was so slow, it was easier and faster to ship the tapes, like drop ship them in UPS and get them, across the country. And so they were putting them in like a UPS envelope and shipping them. And I'm going, this is all of your stuff. Like how are you comfortable with this and not with this? Yeah, we are not good. I won't say we are not generally good at critical thinking in the abstract. That's why threat modeling, I think, is important, because it forces you to kind of go down and probe paths and do it purposefully. But yeah.
And what's funny is, it's even kind of advice, right? Like, oh, you need to have some and actually it's even part of SOC 2 is the redundant. I mean, Seth, you and I dealt with that. It's like the redundancy piece and offsite backups. Yep. And so from you're right about critical thinking, because to somebody that's like, yeah, that makes sense. We want redundancy. We want it, if a fire happens here, we don't want, our machines to be lost. And at the same time, okay, well, you have a problem giving me snippets of code,
Right.
Cool, man. Yep. Good thinking. So
yeah, there's a number of those things that make you scratch your head.
No, for sure. Sorry, go ahead. Oh.
Nah.
I was going to ask. Okay. No, I was just going to ask, right? I think we kind of got off track. You were getting into your background, and we jumped onto SAST, and then
sorry.
But no, yeah. Tell us what you're working on now, what your current interests are. So
let me I'll tell a really quick origin story. So I came up like you, it sounds, Seth, in CS. Actually, I came to college, and I don't have like super impressive. I started at 8 years old on turtle logo or something. Like, I think I played Oregon Trail. I went to an inner city school. We had one computer, and I played Oregon Trail, and that was the last time I touched a computer until the summer before college. Even in high school, when we had to type things, my mom types something stupid like 80 words a minute or something. She used to do dictation as part of her job, and so I would hand write my papers, and she would look at them like this and then type them. And I just remember thinking, "There's no way I'll ever do that." And then I was going into engineering, double E actually, and I went to like the summer orientation and heard the spiel from the double E, and at the time CS was part of engineering. And I remember being so bored by the double E presentation and actually interested in CS. I switched my major and learned how to type that summer. And so all of it was just fascinating to me, and just the idea of building things and making stuff work and getting this thing to do, having an idea in my head and getting the machine to actually do it was fascinating to me. So I didn't come into it necessarily from the kind of the breaker perspective. But I found I had a knack for it, because I could tell other people what was gonna break in their program, just by kind of doing code reviews and helping them out and going, well, I could break it if I did that. And so I took some undergrad security courses, and then I had a job lined up, and this was during the .com bubble burst. and it was with a startup here in kind of the Charlotte area. The bubble burst. That job went away. And so I was just fortunate that I was in a class that was an elective security class, and there was like a flyer that they sent home that was about the government would pay for you to go to grad school if you would come work for them for a couple of years. And I thought, well, the economy sucks. There's no jobs. You mean I get extra schooling and a job? This is perfect. So signed up, and it's called the SFS, or Scholarship for Service Program, which I think is still running pretty strong. But it was trying to get, kind of blue teamers, information assurance people into the government, because a lot of them at the time were retiring. So I went through that program, ended up going to work for the DoD for a while, left there, went to, and I did predominantly, even though there's a lot of security there, I did kind of some security architecture and then development work there. Went to another gig where I did some software development work. And then I went to a bank and did pure security work, code review, which was a lot of fun. And you see a lot of interesting things. So, yeah, and then I went to Whitehat, and then I came to, once I left Whitehat, I had been doing it for a while, and it was a great job. I liked it, but I wanted to change. And so I went and started running a security program at a company called NetSuite, and they recently got bought by Oracle, so that's where I work now. But I still work for NetSuite. And so NetSuite was a company that technically, I guess you could call them a startup, but they'd been around for about 20 years, and so they were more established, and they had bought a startup here in North Carolina, and they were more true startup feel. Had a really good engineering squad. It was kind of the cloud microservices stuff, and NetSuite was not necessarily that at the time, and so they didn't want to kind of impose the older security model on this newer group, and so they brought in somebody specifically to deal with that. So I went and started up a program there, and now I'm running security at NetSuite proper, and starting to kind of poke my head into the rest of Oracle, which is massive and interesting. So
when you say running security, what do you mean? What does that entail day to day?
So most of it is, well, it's a AppSec, product sec kind of role. So it's us as AppSec people embedding with the development teams and engineering and product and program management teams to kind of cradle to grave, from thinking about a product and whether or not we should do it, and talking to them about privacy and legal and all that kind of thing. Our team, I run the engineering team, so the pen test team lives outside of my group, but we work obviously really closely, and they're kind of a sub team, I guess you'd say, our internal pen test team, and so most of what we do is trying to kind of plan for how we're going to make the product more secure, and that goes from planning in security features and building features into the product as a security team. So we write code. It goes to doing design reviews and consulting reviews and threat modeling, working with product teams as they build features out to make sure that they design them to securely. Static and dynamic analysis to test the products once they are being built or are built. Testing them in production, dev, everything, monitoring, incident response, all that kind of stuff we contribute to. So we have a good bit of purview, and then obviously looking at products to bring in to help us, products or tools to help automate all the stuff that we're doing.
And now, is this how your talk at Local MochaSec came about? You're building the AppSec program?
Yeah, it's really, that talk is kind of a retrospective on 2 years of, I came in the door and I thought this will be easy, right? Like I was at the bank. I did a ton of code review, right? I did a bunch of code review, some testing, pen testing, that kind of thing. I went to Whitehat. Obviously, we had a lot of pen testing going on there. I'd seen products from every vertical and every kind of quality level and all that stuff. I knew what went right. I knew what went wrong. I knew how to make, I'm a developer. I know how to build tooling. This should be easy. I should have it knocked out in a couple weeks. And I got there and I was like, oh, sweet mercy. Like this is this is unbelievable. It's and it was with a great team. That's the thing, is like this team wanted security, incredibly intelligent and smart, good practices, like all the things that you would want. Really solid quality team, and it's still terribly difficult. So that talk is really just 2 years of, here's what I came in and thought I was going to do, and how I thought it was going to go, and here's the roadblocks that I ran into, or here's the thing that I ran into that just knocked me over. Like, I think the most significant thing to me is, and I think something that most of us don't talk about a whole lot, is application inventory.
Yeah.
Like, that is such an atrocious problem in our field. I mean, if you look at a place like Oracle, they've got, I don't even know the exact number of internal, but at least external, they've got thousands of products externally facing, all on different release cycles, all in different technology stacks. Like, how anybody keeps track of that in one central place is unbelievable. And, I mean, Oracle's been around a long time. They've got every VCS system you can think of and more, right? Because they've written some internally. They've got internal, databases for this, that, and the other. Obviously, there's spreadsheets galore. Like, the data's tracked all over the place, and you probably could find every bit of information you need. It's just not in one place, and not one person knows it, right? So, even on a small scale, it was debilitating to me to think about, like, we have dozens or hundreds of apps. Like, how do I keep track of all those and where they're at and what's going on with them? It was horrible.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, though, and not everybody's going to agree. Geez, I keep hitting this thing. I need to fix it. Hold on. I don't know. It's just driving me nuts. Anyway, so the question is, do you, I've had this question recently. Do you actually need to inventory all those apps? I mean, the reason I say that is one of the reasons I believe my manager is so successful is he said, these are the things where, first of all, what you can do is put the important stuff, the stuff that drives the business, all in the same infrastructure. And then completely outside of that infrastructure. Like, for us, it's easy. We've got a data center and we've got the cloud.
Right.
If it doesn't matter in the sense of, like, it's, how this happens, and this is part of the inventory management problem, is an app just gets built because it seemed like a good idea, and then it just gets thrown up. And it's not like what powers the business. It's not like, if it goes down, it's not going to, like, mean a ton of money goes out the window, but it now exists, and now it's part of your risk profile, we'll say.
Sure.
But if you can say, hey, if it's one of those apps, not a business critical app, it goes into, we'll say, the cloud.
Yep.
And even if that's popped, there's no chance of it getting, you getting into, like, the data center or getting credentials that really matter off that box. Like, let's say you get remote code execution, or, you get a reverse shell via command injection, whatever the case is. What's the real, like, if the data stored is not that important, if the reverse shell that someone's getting just means that, I don't know, maybe they'll get access keys to spin up another, maybe put your bill up to a certain amount for that, whatever, like, the risk is not super high, then it becomes I've genuinely wondered recently, does it even matter anymore? Do I just care about like this little circle of things? And I think that's why my manager's so successful, is that he that's been his approach, is like, these are the things that give us money or make us money. That's what we're going to give our attention to. But, like, everything else we'll work with as we have cycles, but whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, like everything else, right? I think it requires critical thinking, and it's a nuanced answer in my mind, right? So GitHub's been around how long?
Since 2006, I think, or 2005, something like that.
Okay. So,
but, like, not really popular. I think around 2007 it started gaining traction. I could be wrong about all of this, by the way.
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, like, your company is barely graduating middle school, right? Like, Oracle has been around, and you think about the banks, they've been writing software since the 40s and 50s, right? Like, I mean, it's a different state. And, like, as one example, since I live in Charlotte, a lot of the companies here are finance. I know that historically Bank of America has always run their IT departments very centralized. you had to come through one gating process. If you wanted to do anything, it all had to come through one place. And that's a business decision, and there's drivers for that. Wells Fargo, on the other hand, when they would acquire a company, because everything in finance, the way they grow is by buying other banks, the way that they would run things is they would leave them there and let them kind of run as a little island. So you ended up with this super heterogeneous environment, which has pros and cons. And so I think in some cases, I think being in the cloud helps a lot, because now you have a programmable data plane, right? Like you can ask questions of your infrastructure. And if you know the person, or you have access to all of the environments that are created in your org, you get a lot of wins there. And obviously Oracle and NetSuite both have cloud and data centers. So there's some places where that helps and hurts. But the example I'll give you is, I'm going to forget his name. Peleus Yulee, and I don't know if I've got his name right, or hopefully if somebody can help me, it's Peleus Uhley. And I don't know his exact title or role, but I know he is very high in security at Adobe, and he's been there forever. Incredibly smart guy. And I saw him give a talk a couple years ago where he talked about this very problem. And he said at Adobe, and I forget the exact numbers, but it was in the thousands or tens of thousands. He said they've acquired over years lots of these companies and applications. And he went and did some kind of, Tiger Team research project. And he ended up finding out that he knew about 40% of the applications that they actually had. That was what he knew about, 40%. So that means 60% of the infrastructure. And that's just the stuff he could find. That doesn't mean he got all of it. But the number that he landed at, 60% of that was net new. Now, even if the sum of that, to your point, is mostly unimportant applications, they're not the real, billion-dollar drivers for Adobe or whatever. I get the feeling that there's probably still something that could ruin their day. Like something could screw them over in that, 12,000 applications or whatever the crazy number was. So I think for some companies, you're probably right that you could just, if you've got good practices, you could probably solve it in a number of different ways. But I think for, in particular, big enterprises that have been there a long time, they need to get a better handle on it. They just literally don't know the answer. And they don't know how to get the answer.
I don't know how we're supposed to be polarized and take a hard stance and dig our heels in if you're being so reasonable.
Come on. Well, we all know that Ken works in an AppSec wonderland or fantasy land. So exactly. let's take it back. No, also I'm with you, John. What?
I should say I'm like the worst employee too, because it's 10 years as of like April 2018. So it's like 2008. And I think it came out in like 2007. So I'm an idiot. I'm over here Googling being like, oh man, I'm so wrong. Anyways, back to shitting on me some more, Seth.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. No, what I I would love to have that list. That's always been my big issue, right? Like working in finance as well.
Yeah.
A company that's been around for 20, 30 years, that's moved platforms multiple times.
Yep.
I get Ken's point that there is like the risk profile is definitely where you want to be from an application security perspective, right? Hey, we look at our application and we're like, all right, or we look at our business and we say, these are the things that we should concentrate on. The rest of it, guess what? If somebody pops that box, that's great. We're going to mitigate our risks because there's one true way to actually roll out an application, and that's where we know it's at. But then it's the little things that you don't know about that end up biting you and killing you as a large organization, right? I mean, you look at Facebook recently, right? That's what's been in the news the last couple of weeks, or last few days, I guess I should say. And the way that somebody could access tokens. They were doing everything right, at least what they expected, and there was one small path to actually get that back out. Granted, it was their security team that actually caught it, but only after it seemed like someone was extracting tokens, right?
Right.
So like I look at that problem. I look at like all the different development teams that are at an organization. Smaller is definitely better. It's easier to enforce those restrictions and then be able to say, hey, guess what? We're okay with that. We're okay with that risk. But yeah, I have a hard time saying that that's all right. That it's gonna catch everything that I need it to.
I think you actually make a good point, because like even if you put everything, like let's say, oh, the app doesn't matter, and you put the problem is that if you don't know about it, you don't know if it matters, right? I guess that's what, because you're talking about exfiltrating tokens, and that could be easily something that, I don't know, like it's an OAuth or a SAML app, right? And it's got tokens that it's stored to like do things, access certain resources, and then like you don't even know about it because you don't know about it, right? So I guess I can see the point there, where it's kind of like you can't just shove it into one piece of infrastructure and say like, it's not a problem definitively if you don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, the engineers come to you, and right, like most of the time, the engineering does want to work with security, especially the last 5-6 years. There's definitely more of a congenial attitude between those two organizations. But you still get third-party apps that get stood up. You still get random stuff that somebody buys for marketing and then throws on your internal network. And like I don't know how to solve that. I mean, so at NetSuite, like as you're there building this application security program, I mean, I know what I've done in the past, and I know that like Veracode and others will actually scan IP addresses or IP blocks, tell you what's running on port 80 and 443, but I mean that's still not a guarantee. So what have you done at NetSuite? Like how have you approached that problem?
So I mean we're
solve it for us.
We're throwing darts, man. Like literally, that's all I know to say is. So I mean, some of the ideas we have, right? And we're making more or less progress on some of these. Obviously, things like centralized logging are a big deal, because when you have, most applications have logs, and they can at least feed some form of metadata to you. And we haven't had too many applications because, like I said, NetSuite in our particular case, NetSuite's not crazy old, right? Like it's 25 years old, or 20 years old, something like that. So most applications had logging that was either close to centralized or already done. So we've made sure that we've invested there and got a platform for doing log analysis. And the other thing that buys you is if you've got some automated either log analysis tooling that you want to write that can read from that. And so I'll paper over that whole conversation with saying, mentally shove it into a Kafka cluster. And then that way you can pull off that cluster anytime you want. And then normal logging processes, or, Elk or Splunk or wherever you need logs to go can go. But if you've got it in that queuing system, so you can attach another reader to it, you can start writing your own tooling. And for large sets of data, you can do some kind of either basic statistics, or if you're more savvy, you can do machine learning and that kind of thing to actually get some stuff like that. With AppSensor, actually, a few years ago, we had an intern. She did a machine learning project, and that was fantastic. And we had a guy from Microsoft who did this in Microsoft's cloud environment, who helped us mentor, thank goodness, because we didn't know what we were doing. And he walked us through and said, these are the problems you're going to run into. And sure enough, these were the problems we ran into, even on just, open source data we were able to use. So I think logging is a big deal. Pushing orgs that are comfortable into the cloud and making a paved path for that I think is really helpful, because you have more capabilities there. And you can, anytime you have a queryable platform, like that's a big win for security, I think. So that's been big. Pushing everybody trying to get onto common CI systems has been big for us. And then investing our effort as an engineering team in putting tooling in the CI systems. One of the things out of my Locomoco Sec talk that I think was helpful was that kind of blends a lot of these ideas is the attack surface analyzer. So that's a little side project that I have. But basically what it does is it will, I think the one that I posted online that you can pull just works for JaxRS, but it's pretty easy to see how you would port that to your own language or whatever. But basically, it exposes routes. So every time you scan your application in CI, it will spit out a text file that has the routes. And so that does two things, right? It feeds our dynamic analysis team, or either tooling or team, to know these are all the routes. You don't have to go probe and guess what the routes are. These are the ones that the application serves. So just feed that into Burp or Zap or whatever you're using. It also tells our application security team, because we have really high-end tools like diff that can look at two text files and go, this is the differences. We get notified when the application developers change something, right? So if between this release and that release, there's 7 new endpoints, and we didn't get asked to code review those endpoints, we can go, that looks important. They added something that has token in the name. Let me go look at that and see what that is. So, I think logging is important. Being in the cloud is important. If you can swing it. There's also a lot of, I'll say, nascent tools that are starting to pop up in this space. There's a couple commercial vendors that are trying to play in this area. They're really, really early days. But what most of them are doing is taking these open source data sets, and somebody like, Ken, who works at one of these unicorns, right? They have the engineering time to serve the rest of the world by doing this for us, I think. By going out and pulling these open source data sets. No, I mean, seriously, there's data sets like Scans.io, the ZMap folks. They publish that data. HD Moore from, Metasploit, he's now got a project called Project Sonar, which collects and stores this data. AWS hosts this data. I don't know who collects it, but it's hosted on AWS for free, called Common Crawl. So you can go out and pull this data and start asking questions of this massive sets of data. So it's not like, something you can knock out in a weekend. They are huge data sets, but you can go start asking questions of this data and go, okay, I own this IP block. Show me any hosts that exist in that IP block. Let me go pull data about it. Or I own this domain. Go show me anything in this domain that exists, right? And you can start pivoting from there. And so weirdly, I think blue and red teams to work together, the questions of poking through this data really well, right? That's where they live, particularly red teams that are doing, network pen testing. And so they can tell us how to take these open source data sets and start finding out information. It's not a small investment of effort, but it's a place where I think we should go. And I do think hopefully some vendors are going to start seeing it and popping up, but it's a really freaking hard problem. I'm not gonna lie. We're struggling with it every day.
Yeah. One person asked us, or they asked you, how do you evaluate the quality of results from an open source SaaS tool versus a commercial one? Which, I mean, that's probably not an easy answer. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I don't want to pick on any particular vendors, so I'll pick on all of them at one time. There's a finding for log forging, and it makes me want to punch every vendor in the throat when I see that finding, because 99% of people don't care about log forging, and that is not the most of their problems, but it's super easy to find, and it's rarely wrong, right? Like, because there's like 2 applications on Earth that don't have that problem, and so. The commercial vendors are incentivized, and having worked for one, I don't have a problem saying this. They're incentivized to give you findings, right? And some of them are incentivized to give you. They look at it as their mission to give you every single thing they can find, and that's just the answer. And they don't vet them. Other vendors have taken the route of, we want to give you only true positives, and there's value add there in my mind, depending on your organization and what you can afford. I think there's value add to limited false positives, but vetting open source against commercial, the big difference is data flow. Just being honest, like we use in-house, and if you go look at the attack surface analyzer, you can see that I'm using Antler, which if you are scared of static analysis, go read like the first couple chapters of the Antler book. it's incredible project. Terrence Parr, it's a good testament to an amount of work over 20 years. But static analysis is actually not that scary. You build a grammar, and most times you don't even have to build the grammar if you're working with a popular language. It generates some code for you. You start working and playing with it. So it's pretty fun. And so I'm using it in that product. So it's not, it's relatively approachable. But the really hard problem is to get from open source to commercial. The big difference is data flow. So if you want to find SQL injection, you have to track that from one place in the app through to somewhere else. And that is really, really hard. Most open source tools do okay at what's called intra-procedural. And not really good at inter-procedural, so they're not able to jump across methods. That requires you to have like a store of data to keep track of all this metadata, and it's kind of painful. So most open source projects are good at what they're able to find, and they're good at giving you a way to write rules for yourself. So my push for open source tools is, a friend of mine called it the grep master 5000. So start really easy. And one example of what we did in-house, we had a PHP app, and we had some deserialization issues that I found in it. So we were using a deserialize, and I said, we can't use this. We have to use our own function. So our static analysis rule was grep. If you find deserialize in the app, that's a bug. And you can do things like this with, Brakeman I'm more in the kind of JVM world. So find bugs, sec find bugs, Antler, like you can write your own rules to do these kind of things. And they're not terribly, terribly difficult. But I would not try to build my own data flow analyzer unless you just want to do it as a PhD project or something. It's a lot of stinking work. And there's a reason that it hasn't moved from commercial to open source. So trying to answer the original question, sorry. I think open source is good for the things that it's able to find. And usually it's decent parity. Where commercial products shine is in data flow and the amount of rules that they cover. They have armies of people that are just writing rules, keep up to date, to cover. That's hard to emulate in an open source product. But for your app, it's not that hard, right? Because you may only care about those things. And once you encode a rule, it's there. So we've taken the tact, and I stole the idea. I don't remember who I heard say it first, but of switching from this find everything and tell you all the findings, which we still do, but we do that as kind of an asynchronous process. But we've switched to the view of you must be this high to ride. You can push an app as long as it doesn't have these 7 or 12 or 42 problems. And every month or quarter or whatever, we're adding new rules to that list. And so we know that we're constantly raising the bar. So anybody who's going through our CI is getting better and better and having to fix more and more issues. And at least we have some measure of confidence that we don't have deserialized in our PHP apps, right? Like that's some sort of a win. Sorry, I got a little soapboxy there.
No, I mean,
that's why we have you on.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we were interested in hearing was how you've implemented it, right? Like that always goes back to, like I've always pushed more on like the CI/CD platforms and like QA testing. Yep. Hey, guess what? You can easily check for deserialize. You can easily check for some of like the string concatenation techniques in SQL, right? Like that they exist. If there's plus signs, if there's other things. And guess what? You don't need to build a whole AST to actually identify that. So why not just use grep? Why not just use the tools that you have that are available? And, and then look at the static analysis tools from the commercial side in a different light as all right, we do this once in a while, or we do it as a stopgap, or however else you need to do it. But if you know the application, you're going to be able to identify those vulnerabilities way quicker than a static analysis tool is. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And I love the QA idea. One thing that we were really that I kind of fell into, luckily, was the org that I joined. They had this really unique thing that I've not seen before, where they kind of had rotations. So if you were on the dev team, you would rotate into QA for a while, and vice versa. And so there was some benefits of cross training, and that was just something that existed there. And we had a QA person who wanted to get more into dev, or a couple of them actually. And I said, hey, I've got some security stuff you can work on if you want. And they actually, I didn't touch it. They wrote the entire automation for getting Zap into our daily scans of our app. And they were turned on by it because it was like development work. They were able to kind of flex their muscles there instead of having to go on a rotation. They just went on my rotation. And like you said, all this knowledge was in their head. They knew how to do this, and they were able to both QA it kind of on a manual cycle for a little bit, and then they got it into the automation. And we've been benefiting from that for a year and a half now, right? So huge wins if you just kind of think about who's already doing stuff and who's got the kind of the shortest path to solving this problem. It's not always the security team.
No.
It rarely is the security team, I think.
Yeah. And like I've harped on it for a while because, I came up kind of through a development platform or a development career path.
Sure.
And I always looked at it and I'm like, hey, we write rules to do UI tests.
Right. Right.
Why am I like reinventing the wheel or purchasing some really expensive tool to go send security payloads to my application?
Exactly.
Go play with FuzzDB, or generate your own. It's not that difficult of it. Well, I mean, it is a difficult problem to solve, but it's not like that portion of it is not as difficult, especially when you engage those QA testers.
Yeah, and it's silly to hoard that information. Like it's so useful in their hands, and they've already got the knowledge. Like why I try to shove every bit of, I try to replicate myself with everybody that I work with, because I mean people will impress you if you give them a chance, I think, or at least a lot of people will. And when they get excited about something, they can do amazing things, and why not benefit from that? Like there's nothing that says I have to be the one clicking the button. And matter of fact, I would rather not be the one. I want to think about how to solve the next problem. So,
yep. So tell me a little bit about the Attack Analyzer project, right? That sounds incredibly relevant to source code review and the stuff that just from a risk perspective that I look at on a daily basis.
Yeah,
but like I haven't. Did we find a link for that one, Ken?
It's github.com/JT Melton, and then I think it's called Attack Surface Analyzer. So I should also mention, as I've moved up to NetSuite, my role has changed. So I changed back in February, 7 months ago, from being at the smaller company up to the NetSuite proper. And so one of the things we're really trying to focus on, and we actually just got a rec, is pushing more of our stuff open source. I'm obviously a big believer in open source, and have been doing it for a long, long time. And our management is a big believer, and actually has contributed open source code. So that's really a good situation to be in. So we're going to try to push more of it out. There's a couple projects that are out there. One I'll be talking about soon. So I don't really have a whole lot to share on it just yet, but it's about trying to work with some third-party library work. But the Attack Surface Analyzer, I should also mention there's one available, very similar implementation that's got more meat on the bones, and that's part of ThreadFix. And I don't remember what it's called, but Dan Cornell he had talked about it a few years ago. I had written this internally in-house, and then Dan announced this. We were talking about it at the conference, and I said, oh man, I've had this in-house and it's so useful. I'm glad you put it out there. So they've got a product that's out there, but I think it's, I'm not sure whether it's separate, standalone, or what, and how frequently it gets updated, but it is available. So Attack Surface Analyzer, it's the first cut for now. I think it covers Node.js Express right now, and it covers JAX-RS in Java. And so basically it just spits out this data. I think there's a text emission and a JSON emission, and then you can start munging the data. But yeah, it takes an Antler, it wraps Antler and calls it to operate on the source code, and then it'll spit that data out for you. And you can then take that data and munge it however you want. If you want to use it in feeding, like what we use it for is feeding our pen testing group. metadata about these are the routes that exist, so you can pre-code those or preload those. And then we use it on our engineering team to determine both areas where we might need to go do a follow-up design review if somebody didn't get us in place first, and where we may need to go do code reviews. So if we're unfamiliar with a piece of code, then we can go do that. And plus, just having that data stored, I mean, it's this much text, right? Like it's not it's not obscene.
Yeah.
You can store it forever, which is another really nice thing because you can trend data and you can see how your application changed and grew over time. You can do visualizations, all that stuff that's really cool to managers to see. But we're going to try to start pushing out more of these open source kind of point projects. I'm a big believer in the Unix style of you stitch it together how you want to. But we're going to try to push out more of these point projects that solve these individual problems, because we're having to solve them, and there's no reason. A lot of it's not proprietary, so there's no reason it can't be public. So, yeah, I think that tool will continue to grow, and if people have languages or frameworks they want to see supported, let us know, and we'll try to get some support in there.
All of them? No, that's
that's the problem, right?
Yeah. So no, definitely, because I started going down a hole, as I pulled up the project. I'm like, oh, sweet, yep, I can see JavaScript, I can see Java in there.
Yep.
But then I'm also thinking, oh man, like your .NET Core, your .NET, ASP.NET applications, right? It's just, but at least you've got to start, and that's that's where it's super helpful. I mean, I know Ken and I can push, what we know about some of the open source like Ruby and Django. There's other ways to retrieve that information that you won't necessarily need to code something that scans every piece of those applications.
Right.
But it would be extremely useful, right? That's, as we talk about code reviews, that's one of the hardest things to get people to do is actually dig into the source and figure out what all those routes are. Because if you don't know what the routes are, you don't know where your threats are. You don't know where to start. So
right. And you think about, we were talking about having an app inventory. In my mind, the way I visualize it is just basically a key value store, right? Like, I mean, you probably are going to have some specific things, but give me a key value store where the key is the application or the application identifier, and just let me throw crap at it. Like, let me throw attack surface analyzer, right? At this particular application. The key is attack surface analysis, and here's the value, just a blob of text. Let me throw dependency check scans at it. Let me throw brakeman scans at it, right? And then I'll come back and ask for that data and analyze it. But there's things like, how do we analyze third-party libraries? How do we analyze, like we're talking about routes? How do you analyze cyclomatic complexity, right? Developers may be interested in that. Test coverage, all those kind of things matter. And all of those things describe the health of an application. So why not put them in one place and start tracking that health and kind of giving people a grade or a scorecard that they can work against.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up cyclomatic complexity. It made me think of, not that the two are related, but it didn't. They're not related, but it did make me think of someone talking about code churn as a sort of like, because cyclomatic complexity, like that's just how complex the software is. But it made me think about the fact that like we've talked about using like code churn, how often something changes, as being sort of a metric for like if it's going to potentially have a security concern.
Right. Yeah, I believe that. I think that's a good. It may not be 100% accurate, but it feels like you're throwing a dart on the dartboard at least, right? Like it feels fairly accurate. And to me, that's what we should be doing, right? Like let's start collecting data, because right now you don't know what you don't know, and we don't collect any of this stuff, right? I don't know about you at GitHub, but I don't collect any of this stuff, or I'm starting to, but I can't answer questions about. I don't have a good feeling about what's the security of these hundreds of applications. Why can't I get some form of metadata that will start answering that? And developers care. If you give them a place to store this information, they care. Look at their CI dashboard. They've got test coverage as one of the metrics that they're tracking. So all these developer metrics security should care about them, right? And so, like you, Seth, I mean, I think about stuff in a very developer way because I've been a developer for so long. And I think we can exploit a lot of that in security and get huge lift if we just kind of ask them what they're doing and ask them how they would solve a problem.
Yeah. Well, piggyback on top of what they're already doing, right?
For
I
sure.
mean, I don't know what it is about security that we feel like we need to, resolve all of these problems, right?
Yep.
I realize that security is kind of a sexy topic or whatever, and it allows us to actually like build something and sell it for more money or whatever. But if you're embedded in an organization, there's no reason why you need to write your own scanner, your own test suite.
Right. Yeah. My favorite story, my favorite visual image of that is when, and I don't mean to pick on a vendor, but it's the best story I know. IBM years ago had it was Ounce. I think they had converted to IBM by that point, and they put out an article, and you can probably still find it somewhere, where they were talking about they had the IBM R&D team, not the security team, but their like static or their CS R&D team come in and look at the look at the static analyzer for false positives. And I forget what the exact thing they were looking for. I think it was cross-site scripting, and they were able to reduce their cross-site scripting false positive rate by something like 99.64% or something. And they basically said they did this complex strings analysis where they built all the strings up to this one giant table, and what Fortify calls trust boundary violation. So when you're shipping data around and you've got it tagged with a key, they linked the key and said, when this goes over here, we can track now and know that this going here and this going here are two different pieces of data, or they're the same. So they bragged in this paper about a 99.64% reduction. And I remember being dumbstruck and thinking, why would you brag about that? Like, that should be quietly a bug fix that you never tell anybody on earth. Like, you should not be bragging that. I just don't understand that. And why. I'm convinced that if security was more of a market driver where, you think about how much money IBM makes off developers and how much they make off security, and it's just a pittance, right? If it got to a point where it was worth that much money and hordes of developers started looking at it, I think our products would change like in a couple of years, and they would look vastly different. And I think the place to look at that is when you look at monitoring, right? Monitoring has fundamentally changed in the cloud and DevOps and that whole chain of events that's happened the last 10 years. Monitoring looks fundamentally different. And security gets so much for free there, so much for free, just because developers are already doing it and we can piggyback. If you think about that kind of fundamental sea change happening in other places in security, it would look like a different world, right? I think we're very, very immature and nascent in security. So I mean, we're getting better, but I think if you look at static analysis, you'll note that the number of new frameworks coming out in the world highly exceeds the rate at which those are being covered by products. So the change is glacial.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I always love looking at, all right, like, I don't mean to pick on them, but like the Node security project, the Lyft security guys that got acquired by, they're now a part of the central NPM team, which is great. That's exactly what you want to see.
For sure.
But then, they do security review of NPM modules. I'm like, look, there's 2 or 3 of you, and there's 800 to 900 new modules a day.
Right.
And like, I know you're automating some of it. I'm just like, I'm very skeptical that we're catching everything that we need to. Yes, you're putting out great work, and I don't want to take that away from them.
Right.
But I just I'm like, the problem is so much bigger.
Right.
I mean, I'm like, and I know that they'll get some like added benefits from being part of that central team that's actually looking at things at a lower level. So,
well, yeah. I mean, did you see like NSP is deprecated now? NSP is gone, and it's just I guess I think that they're
It's now
giving you
NPM audit, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
yeah. So now you get alerted if you installed something. I think that was the way. We should have Adam Baldwin on anyways, and he can just tell us all about this stuff, and we can see how he's doing it and what the challenges are and how they're facing them and stuff. I'll reach out to Adam. We'll definitely extend an invite.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
No, but John, that's it's super interesting, right? I mean, I know we've been going for hour and 20, 25 minutes or something like that. So we'll be wrapping it up here pretty quick, but I really appreciate your perspective on implementing these and like what you've been doing internally. I'm really excited about the attack surface analysis tool because Ken and I have been talking about something similar for a long time. And it's like, oh, great. Well, we could probably just do some pull requests here and maybe get ourselves off the ground, right? So
yeah, I think I think it's and certainly pull requests are great, and even issues is great, right? Like knowing what people need and will use is killer for an open source project. And you don't release open source projects. I learned this when I started blogging a long time ago. I didn't blog for people to read my blog. I blogged because I was hopping jobs and I forgot what I was doing, right? So I would do something at work and then I'd go home and do a white box version of it and post it so that when I went to my next job, I would remember what I needed to remember. So the same thing for open source, right? Like I think hoarding security information is just ridiculous to me. We relatively are failing. I think watching the normal news channel will teach you that we can't say that we're doing an awesome job collectively as a community, right? Like there are a few standout companies that are doing great, but even they are going to have issues. But collectively as a community, I think we are not doing a stellar job, and so we should be helping each other like as much as possible. We should be. And why do I have to rewrite the same thing, or why should you have to rewrite the same thing when you switch jobs? Or okay, Rails is not going to change the way they do routing every 30 minutes, right? Like they're going to change on releases, right? And so let's solve that problem one time and then help. I mean, how many people would be helped by that, right? So yeah, so I'm ranting at this point, but yes, I believe in it. I believe in open source as an enabler for doing better security.
I mean, I think you're seeing companies share more and more information. Certainly like I think one of the again a conversation that came up at Cactus Khan was around Ryan. Gosh, I can't remember his last name, but Ryan from Slack and his whole logging setup that he explained. Yeah, Ryan Huber, thank you. Yep. Who again we should probably invite on as well. Yeah, so I think, but I mean, you're definitely in like Netflix. They're sharing a lot of their open source code and their
for sure.
Sauce, they're. So I do think there's some sharing there for sure, but static now I think that the reality is that anytime there's money on the line, I give you this stuff, then like I don't make money or the company I work for doesn't make money. It's always going to impede progress.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, I think as we get more developers in, as we get more QA people in, we're starting to share we're starting to accumulate brain power, and some of that cranial horsepower can be put to good use by sharing the information. So yeah, I mean, I push people to open source stuff as much as possible. There are there are fiscal motivations sometimes that prevent that, but I'm in a good place right now where we can start doing it, so we're going to.
Awesome. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm a realist. I get that there's business there, but at the same time, like you said, some things can certainly be shared. So
yeah, for sure.
Well, we thank you. Seriously, we thank you for your time. I get the sense that we could probably all sit around for about 3 or 4 hours. What's the next conference that you're going to?
I am traveling the next few weeks. So I'll be at AppSec, USA in next week, I guess. And then more limited, I'll be at BSIM the week after. And then I will be at I forget the name of it. Gene Kim's conference, DevOps Enterprise Summit, and LastCon. So I'll be at those 4, and then I'm hoping to be done for the rest of the year. Yeah,
LastCon's a favorite of ours.
yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. So if y'all are at any of those, I will happily get together and jackjaw about this for a lot longer, because I have thoughts and ideas. So and if anybody needs some ideas for commercial opportunities, I have lots of those too, but I try to keep those quiet. Not for me. I just mean
right.
I'm not
No,
all that.
what day are you getting into AppSec USA?
I'm driving over Wednesday. We're actually going into the office Monday, Tuesday, and we're hosting an internal security con at Oracle. So that should be a good time. We're trying to get people in and do internal information sharing too, so it should be good. But yeah, we'll be driving up Wednesday.
I think I'm gonna end up missing you. I'm flying out Tuesday night after Seth and I's training.
Okay.
But
no worries.
I would say, and actually, let me promote AppSec Cali for a second, because they're coming up soon, and they've got a call for training and a call for papers. They should you should definitely submit, because you can't go wrong. You live in Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
So like, you know what it's like to be dealing, or I guess it's probably not as bad. Obviously, you're more south, but like, yeah, the winter in anywhere but Santa Monica sucks. So go there in January and you're gonna have a good time. So but yeah, the call for papers and call for trainings out. But if you do that one,
Okay.
We might see you there. So
Gotcha. Yeah, and
we're trying to make it out there.
If not, I'll definitely be trying to come back to Locomoco. That was a good time. So
heck yeah, me too. I want to still go back again. It was great.
Yeah. So I had one last recommendation I was going to make for your listeners. I do listen to y'all, so thank y'all for putting all this stuff on. But something that I try to recommend to a lot of security people, just because it's not necessarily in our wheelhouse, but it's one of the most useful things that I've seen. So have y'all seen like Papers We Love or Systems We Love? Have you seen that?
No, I'm Googling it now.
Yeah. So Papers We Love and Systems We Love are communities, kind of like, kind of like you might have local OWASP chapters. They're groups of people in different areas that read computer science papers or whatever, and they talk about different. The Systems We Love was kind of a spinoff of that. So super interesting. But then there's a guy, Adrian Collier. I think his last name is Colyer. He used to work at, like, if you're familiar with Spring, the Spring framework, Spring Source, he was the CTO of that company, Pivotal, for like 15 years, way back before they were Pivotal.
Wow.
And the dude is just crazy smart. I think he's like a VC now, but he does a service called the Morning Paper. And he takes some computer science paper and writes a blog post almost every day. And he kind of dumbs it down for people like me so that I can actually understand. And, he makes, it's just kind of a one pager. So you can usually read them in 2 or 3 minutes, but the exposure you get to different topics, and he covers a lot of security too. So there's always interesting stuff there. But the exposure you get to different topics is just fascinating. So for anybody who's interested in, like, upping their game and doing research and all that kind of stuff, it's the most useful thing that I've found, and it's only been going a couple years. So I used to go back and like print out, ArcSiv papers and like read all these old computer science papers because they're smart, like there's a lot of value there, but it's just so much work. And that guy's doing a bunch of the work for you. So I always try to promote his free thing. So.
Awesome. And I'm sorry, what was the name? I'm trying to find, what was the name?
Adrian Collier, Colyer. I think is his name. If not, I'll send it to you afterwards. But no,
that's it.
The Morning
I
Paper. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yep. blog.acollier.org.
Yep. Yeah, and he has a Twitter handle, so you can just follow him and see his posts every day. Yeah, man, it seems like a mountain of work to have to do that type of assessment and write up, but it's always super interesting to me. and it gets you exposure to, like, there's a couple things that I've gone through there and I thought, man, that's cool. I wonder if that would work. And I've stolen ideas from research papers that he did a write-up on that have helped, in my day-to-day work. And so always good to see what other people are doing in the field.
Definitely is. Cool. Well, again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Yeah, if there's, I would love to have you back on. I mean, it does feel like we could spend another hour and a half talking at a minimum, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've never
we'll
had
chat.
talking.
Yeah, I don't think we do much either. Right? Obviously,
Nice.
Ken's a little quiet sometimes, but
I'm actually tweet.
Oh,
whoa!
we lost him. he disconnected. He had Control W.
Exactly. No more talking for Ken.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I think we'll go ahead and close it out for tonight. Ken and I will be at AppSec USA for the training as well. He'll probably join back up here shortly, or his system completely died. And then I'll probably be there. I'm there until Thursday, so watch for me.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
no worries. We just kept going.
Cool.
Yeah. So we're going to sync up at AppSec USA, and otherwise, join our conversation if you want to join the Slack channel. We'll have this episode posted shortly. Yeah, I think that's everything. Stick around for just a minute after we stop the broadcast.
Yeah.
And we'll go from there. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and for asking questions and interacting. Thanks, Ken.
Great. Thank y'all.